Nana and Papa?
Oh, my shadow's there. Yes, but not to this. I put a lamp for Pop,
Oh.
a desk lamp on a ladder. He was very oblivious to the
Oh.
surroundings, so I could actually do a lot more where Nana did very little.
Yeah.
But that didn't really go well anyway. But I had a regular camera and no lights, and he was right against the wall.
Okay.
Not so
Yeah.
pretty.
I don't remember.
I'll show it to you. Okay, we're finally here. We'll start linear. We'll start from the beginning, but we're going to jump around, so don't worry about where we wind up. First thing is, what do you know about your ancestors and how you got here, either DiCarlo or Pugliese side? What do you know about the story of
How my
arriving?
family got here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. My mother's family came over around the turn of the last century. Her father came here first. He had already met my grandmother on the other side. But he came to get settled and get a job if he could, and then he sent for her. And she came on what the family always calls the pickle boat. And she came with her mom, and I think she came with one sister. I'm not sure. She had a number of sisters, but she came there, and they got married here in this country, in Philadelphia. And that's how my mom's family got here.
But what year was
Do I know what year?
they got married?
I'm not really sure. It's at the fairly early years, early 1900s, I would think, because I'm trying to figure out by their ages. Nana was born 13, and Joe 11, and Sarah at 9, and there was a child before that, probably 7, she's consistent with like clock here, 7. She probably wasn't here all that long when she had that. She's probably got here. I would tell you off the top of my head, and I don't know for sure, but giving the timing, she probably came 1904 or 5 in that era.
What do you know about their life before they came over in Italy? What did Nana and Pop, I guess in this case Nana, tell you about her father and mother?
What are my grandparents' lives like?
Yeah.
Okay. My grandfather lived in Sicily, as did my grandmother. And his father either owned or ran for somebody lemon orchards. And he worked with his father. And there were several other children in the family. I'm not right now sure about how many. He certainly had one brother, because the other brother married one of Grandmom's sisters. So 2 brothers married 2 sisters. So those are double cousins. His mother died in an earthquake. There was an earthquake in Sicily, and she was buried under a building of some sort for several days. When they found her, however, she was very close to death, and then she passed away. She didn't survive. His father, I don't know what the time span would be, but his father later married her sister. And she helped raise the children. And he always thought very highly of her. He really thought she was a good woman, and he spoke really, really well of her. When he was a young man, he wanted to come to America because it was hard living. His father did not want him to go. He wanted him to help him with the orchards. But she, his stepmom, aunt, saved money out of the household money a little at a time. And she gave him a little socks to buy his transport to this. Now, I don't know whether the father ever found out how he got the money or not, but she wanted him to have it because that's what he wanted. And that's how he got here. She paid his way. Now, my grandmother was also she was from a fairly poor family, and she worked as a maid, like a personal maid, a lady's maid to this fairly wealthy company. And she also cooked for them. Now, my mother says, oh, she was a good cook, but you couldn't prove it by me. Because, I don't know, when I knew her, she was not she was boil it till it died kind of a cook, you know, and she would make lunches for Rita and Bob and me, and she would make eggs, and they were crunchy. We used to call them, oh, God, Grandma's crunchy scrambled eggs. But my mother was very loyal, and she said, well, you know, she did cook very well before. You know, well, all right. So that's kind of what she did. She was very young. I don't know how they met. They probably looked from the same town. I would love to find their passports or something like that, but I don't have it. But sometime maybe I'll get into records and take a look. At any rate, they met there in Sicily, and as I told you, came over, and that's how they met, and that's their side.
So, well, he got a job doing what, and how do you bring everyone over?
He got a job, like a lot of immigrants in those days, in construction. So he worked in construction. Eventually, you know, as he got acclimated in the country, I think he sold insurance for a while. You know, one of those door-to-door guys that they used to have in those days. And I don't really know how that happened. All I know is eventually that's what he did. But in order to get started, he did construction. Very popular way for immigrants who hardly spoke the language to get rolling, because there were always people here, other people from the same town. You know, they called them paisans, and it meant the same town. They were, and he probably had a hook up that way. But I don't know. I'm speculating. I really am, because that's just how things were in those days. And Grandma, she was illiterate. She never had much education. She couldn't read. He could, obviously. He must have had much more education. Well, I think from the sound of it, his family had more means. So he probably got some education. But he certainly, obviously, if you're going to sell insurance, you're going to have to read something. So he did have that. She sewed. She would make alterations and things like that until her eyes got bad. You know, but she really didn't have much other skills. Of course, when she came, finally, I mean, got married. She had 5 children to care for. You know, women in the 1900s did not go out and become career ladies for the most part, especially given her educational level. But she had her hands full doing that, because don't forget, very early on she was widowed.
Before we get to that, she comes over, they get married.
Yes.
5 kids. First of all, what were their names? The kids' names, but also your grandparents' names. I don't think we've said
My
that
grandparents' names. My grandfather's name was Antonio, and my grandmother's name was Antonina. Now, my grandfather, according to my mom, because he was long gone before I was born, he used to call her Nina. You can see, you know, where that came from Antonina. However, all of her records here say Anna, and that's what she kind of answered to here. So I don't know. I guess it came from the Antonina too, but maybe that Nina was his pet name. But my mom always remembered him calling her Nina. You know, she said he used to come in the door and say, "Nina, I'm home," and you know, and she'd say, "Oh, she kind of liked that, my mother." It's kind of nice. She idolized him, my mom. She thought he was just terrific.
What was his last name?
Puglisi, but pronounced the Italian way, it's Pugliese. You don't pronounce the G in Italian, it's Pugliese. A lot of people here say it Puglisi, and in fact they spell it that way, but it's really Pugliese. Her maiden name, let me think here. It'll come to me. I'll think about it later.
Okay, so what did Nana tell you about her father?
About her father?
Yeah.
She thought he was a very gentle person. She thought that he really, really loved his kids, that he worked really, really hard to take care of them, and that he really, really cared for his wife. She always thought that was, to the end of her days, she thought that was the ideal marriage. He died when he was 47 of a cerebral hemorrhage. The kids were fairly young. I think my mom was 13, 15, 17. Aunt Sarah was 17 when he died. Aunt Joe was 15. My mom was 13. Uncle Joe was 11. Uncle John was 9.
And what year was that?
Hmm?
What year?
I think that was 27. I think that was 27. I'm not sure. Yeah, well, let's see. 13 and 13. Yeah, 1926. If Nana was 13, then it would have been 1926. And he had a cerebral hemorrhage at work. And that was it. So my grandmother was left with 5 children, couldn't read a word, didn't speak all that well, and she had all these kids to take care of. They lost their house. Eventually, they moved into a smaller house. The girls went to work. And Sarah and Joe and my mother. Children worked in those days. This is before child labor laws. And they all did the same thing. They all went into tailoring. And they contributed. Now, my mother went to what they used to call continuation school. That is, it was like going to class part of the time, working part of the time, but she didn't do that for very long. They would spend summers in Jersey. My grandmother had a brother who had a farm in Mullica Hill, and all of them would go in the summer and help in the farm, doing whatever they needed to do, often coming back late to school, even in the summers, even before. But so she had a lot of funny stories about stuff that happened on the farm, including the story when a bull chased after Aunt Josephine and almost caught her, but she climbed over a fence. She got to the fence before he did and climbed over. But that had to be a scene. But they did all right there. He treated them, well. She said they had a little place to live there on the farm, and she said that her mother routinely went out and copped a chicken and did that. But it wasn't a bad situation. It wasn't, it wasn't slave labor or anything. They just helped out, and they all did. In those days, everybody lent a hand, that's all. And I wasn't crazy about farm life. I don't think any of them were. It was mostly the girls. And once their father died, Uncle John, who was the youngest at 9, went to Girard College. Neighbors came and said, there's this wonderful place, and it would be good for him. It's an opportunity to get education. And it was. He did very well there. Always loved the place. Always talked really well of it. And it was relieved the burden somewhat because they fed him and clothed him, and there was no tuition. It was set up for poor white boys at that time. You know, it was in Stephen Gerard's will. Of course, that all changed, you know, as time went on. But it was a nice school. It was a good place, and he liked it. He got a good start there. It was a shame that Uncle Joe couldn't have gone, but they considered him too old. They wanted to get boys when they were younger. And, you know, unfortunately, he was 11, which was a shame for him because he lost in one blow. He lost his father. He lost his brother. Life completely changed. He lost their home. You know, I've always felt bad for him. The girls stuck together, but he was alone. And I always think that that really affected him, not for the good. He always had kind of a sad life, I thought. But, you know, life was very tough then. There was no Social Security, there was no welfare, no food stamps, nothing like that. What you had to work for, even as children. And what happened in that immigrant community is that everybody really did lend each other a hand. Even in their straitened circumstances, they took in various, you know, kids from parts of the family, like Jimmy Marchese, cousin, who lost his parents, at least his mom, and his father couldn't handle everything at once, and he came. He's the guy that does the glasses. He became an optician, and that's where I got my first glasses. In fact, his store is still around, and he's gone, but his son runs it. It's moved from where it was, but they took Jimmy in for a long time until his father could get back on his feet. But that's what people did. You know, you had to do that, and they looked after each other. It was a very tight community. You know, they really, well, they were very faithful to each other.
Where is the community? Where are they? Where are they living at this point?
Where were they living?
Yeah, where is somewhere in Philadelphia?
Somewhere in South Philadelphia. I think that they lived on Mercy Street, 10th and Mercy. I have no idea where exactly it is, but it's in South Philly. I'm pretty sure it was 10th and Mercy.
So what do you remember about your grandmother?
What do you remember about my grandmother?
Your grandmother. Your grandmother. What do you remember about her?
Oh, she was a character. She was a very, very dramatic person. You know, she was very dramatic, that's all. You get into a discussion with her, and it was theater. It was theater. She was funny. She eventually, she came to live with my Aunt Sarah. When my Aunt Sarah's husband died, my Uncle Phil, which was in 1945, my grandmother and Aunt Jo, who never married, the two of them came to live with Aunt Sarah and stayed forever. I know my grandmom died when she was still there, and Aunt Jo moved right into the nursing home with my Aunt Sarah, so they were always together. The sisters all worked, and what Grandmom did is look after the kids. She looked after Rita and Mary Ann there, but because my mom worked, she also looked after my brother and me. You know, when we were in elementary school, for instance, she would walk over to our house, and Rita would come home from her school, and this is lunchtime, you know, everybody came home at lunch, and she would make lunch for us while we raised Cain. But she really didn't care because she was looking at her soapies. She looked at 1 hour from 12 until 1. She would make the lunch, put it out on the table. Everybody came in, we would be in there, and she would be watching her soapies, and Peggy, the dog, a Boston Bull Terrier, would sit under the kitchen table. And, you know, we didn't like those crunchy scrambled eggs, so Peggy got fat. We fed Peggy most of our lunch. most of the time. I have no idea what she got out of these soap operas because she didn't speak all that well, but she was glued to them. I think in her mind it was real, that this camera was some kind of magic eye that looked in on people's lives. And I know I've told you this story before she had this character named Hazel, and she could not pronounce Hazel to save her life. It was Riezelu. Don't ask me how Riezelu came out of Hazel, but it was Riezelu, and she was like the baddie in whatever one of these 4 soap operas. They used to be 15 minutes around. And one day Riezelu met her fate. And she was gone, and Grandma cheered. Yes, she named her a few names, which I don't want to translate. And lo and behold, like 6 months later, this nice actress, she got a new part in one of the other soap operas. Grandma had a fit. Oh my God, wait till they find out. Wait till they find out where she is. They don't know, and they know it's a play. It's all pretend. She'd do this. What do you know? What do you know? You know, and something else to really wonder about is the Kefauver hearings were going on then. It was the first time that anything like that had been televised. You know, it was the 50s, and she was glued to that. Don't ask me what she got out of it. I couldn't tell you, but we were not allowed to talk. While she watched those hearings. You know, so we had a good time. But when the 3 of us used to raise hell, you know, and finally it was time to go to school, and she booed us out, and away we went. And she would be back and forth between Rita's house and our house, which was only a block away. That's all. But she would come with the dog, good old Peggy. Peggy originally belonged to my Uncle John, but he had an Army assignment. He was in the Army for years. It was a career. He was an officer I think when he left, he was a lieutenant colonel. But he had this dog, and he had a new assignment overseas, and he couldn't take the dog. So my aunts inherited Peggy. And Peggy lived with them for years and years, until she was really old. And Peggy stayed with my grandmother. She'd go back and forth with her, you know. So, and Peggy got very fat from all those lunches. And my Aunt Sarah, really, honest to God, did not know why this dog was gaining weight, because she would complain to my mother, I don't know what's wrong with this dog. I put the food down, it doesn't eat. But look how fat she is. She's got a tumor. I'm going to have to take her to the vet. The dog was not starving, let me put it that way. She lived to a ripe old age.
So your grandmother understood English to a point.
Pardon?
Your grandmother understood English to a point.
Oh, she understood quite a bit. Yes, she did. I mean, by the time we were around, she understood quite a bit. You know, in those early years when her children were small, she didn't, because she kept so close to home. You know, later she was forced to, really, but she didn't really do the outside stuff much. The girls did a lot. I mean, they went in shopping. They did the shopping, you know, for food or whatever they needed to do. She did sewing or something. Eventually she couldn't sew because she got cataracts, and she had cataract operation. Of course, it's not like today. It was horrendous. I don't think her sight ever really was that great after that, you know. I mean, my mom told me that when she had to lie for 2 weeks straight with her head between sandbags. You weren't allowed to move because it would rip, you know. And the results were not great. And from then on, you had to wear these really thick glasses, which she wore, you know. I mean, she would be astounded to hear you walk in the morning and go out and have lunch, you know, the same day. It was a tough thing then. Those were bad days.
I remember a few stories. One of those stories that always sticks out on my mind about your grandmother was actually right after David was born.
What?
After David was born.
Yeah.
You said you had a dream about your grandmother.
I did. I did. I remember that to this day. She died in the spring before your brother was born, before David was born. Probably June, something like that. I don't recall now. And I was expecting at the time of the funeral. It was really kind of sad. And David was born in December, and about 2 weeks after he was born, I had this really, really vivid dream that I can still picture. In the dream, I go to the door of the apartment, and it's my grandmother standing there. And I looked at her, and she's wearing this same kind of things that she always wore, and she always had this leather shopping bag. She had that over her arm, and I said, "What are you doing here?" in the dream. And she said to me, "I've come to see your baby." And I walk in, and she comes in, and she looks at the baby in the crib, and she said, "He's really pretty." And then she leaves. That was it. It was like so eerie. It was only a few months after she died. Oh, I got it. I never forgot it. I never forgot it. I had another dream with her and a baby after Tabby was born. We had gone to Dave's, and Tabby was just a week old or so, something like that. And we were there. And I had this dream where I was in an auditorium, like a school auditorium. And I look up on the stage, and there's my grandmother. This was so strange. I remember what she had on. She had this olive green kind of a dress that she wore to death. But here's the weird part. She had a saxophone. And she looks down, and she waves, and she starts to play the saxophone. It was so funny that I woke up laughing. It was like, wow. And she was going, no. And it was like she was happy to have this new baby in there. She seems to be attending everybody's births here. But I woke up laughing, literally out loud. Your dad thought I was nuts. But that was funny. It was funny. So we had a nice relationship with her. She was a character. She was really funny, But like I say, she was a drama queen. Oh man, was she a drama queen? But that's how it is.
How did talk about Nana growing up and what she went through, and then kind of take me through her life in a
well, I've covered a good bit of what her life would have been in just now. They were very poor. They did not have a lot of money. They worked very hard. It was unfortunate that her dad died when he did. I think they would have had a better life. He would have gone on, and he was, at least when he was alive, supporting the family, and they were okay. Though it wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't much at all, but at least they were, together. A lot of work. The girls always worked because my grandmother was always ailing, one thing or another. She really was. She always seemed to have some problem. She had some other medical problems that she was in the hospital for, but I don't, what it was. And of course, you got to consider the state of medicine in those days. We're talking the 20s, 30s. This is not much. The girls worked a lot. They missed a lot of school. They never really got educated. They worked all the time. It was not a great life. It was not a great life. My Aunt Sarah got married a barber. Went to live at 54th and Greenway Avenue in Philadelphia on a corner property, and the barber shop was in the front, and then they lived behind it and upstairs. So it was like the front part of the house it would have been. And he had a barber shop. That's what he did until he died very young, in his 30s, of kidney disease. I think he must have been kidney cancer. But, you know, there were no, you know, you don't get kidney transplants in 1945. That's when he died in 1945. And that was really tough for my Aunt Sarah because Mary Ann had polio, had to be in an iron lung for a while, and I believe had some brain damage because they couldn't, it was wartime, they couldn't get the iron lungs soon enough, and she had some oxygen problems, and there they were. I think that's where my Aunt Jo and my grandmother moved in to give her a hand so that she could go back out to work. She hadn't gone back, you know, up to that time, but she had to go back, you know. So not easy. Nobody had it easy. Nobody had it easy. My mom, you know, grew up. She always says I was good looking, she said. The guys told me I was easy on the eyes. She liked to dance, always went out dancing. That's how she met my dad. They met at these places. There was a lot of dance halls, and they met there. And they were good dancers together. They really were. He was very light on his feet. And they always liked it. They did. That's how they met. Got married. She was 25. He was 26. And there they are.
Yeah. Let me just make sure we're running. Let's see. Still rolling. Say hello.
Huh?
Okay. Okay, we're still good. Just making sure. Okay. All right. So Nana had a nickname.
Nana had a nickname, yes. They called her Dixie.
Why?
At the time, there was a comic strip called Dixie Dugan. And Dixie Dugan wore her hair in the same style that my mom did, so they thought she looked like Dixie Dugan. So they called her Dixie. And that was her nickname. She never liked her own name, Jenny, which was not really her given name. Her given name was Giovanna, which translates to Joanne, actually. But they never used it. She became Jenny, and she just never liked it. She said Jenny was the name for a horse. So I said, oh, well. So I don't know. She never really changed it, but every record of hers, except for her birth certificate, says Jenny.
How did we get to Jenny?
I don't know how it got to Jenny. I don't know. Giovanna maybe is not that far from it, but, well, they were all named Italian names. My Aunt Sarah was Serafina, Josefina, Giovanna, Giuseppe, and Giovanni, John. But they anglicized it. Everybody anglicized it. You wanted to be, immigrants then wanted to be part of the country. It was very important that they be Americanized. You know, they had very strong ties to their own community, but they wanted to be American. So names got changed and spelled. That's why it's hard to dig up information, because you don't know what names are going under. And often they came over with the wrong names because people checking them in on this side didn't understand the language, misspelled it. People like my grandmother, who didn't read or write anyhow, whatever. Her name was Anastasi, I just remembered. Anastasi. 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 That was it. Maybe that's where the Anna came from too. But anyhow, that was, their names all changed. They all became American names, you know. But I know I have copies of her birth certificate, and it's Giovanni.
So we've gone to Nana's side fairly we've gone through Nana's side.
Okay.
So let's go back. And what do you know about your grandparents on
The
Pop's side?
DiCarlo side?
Yeah.
I don't know as much. I know that they two came around the same time, possibly earlier, because Pop was born in 1912 and he was the last of a very long line. I think from an old passport that I have of my grandmother, his mom, that they came here in 1887. I can't make the numbers out, but that would probably be about right because he had sisters that were at least 10 years older than him. So if they came over the late 1880s, that would be about right. They were not from Sicily. They were from more northern town. I have that passport, and it gives the town and the province. Can't quite make out the writing, but I'm going to see if I can't. And they were from more northern parts.
Near Milan, I think. Near Milan. I think they're near Milan, right?
I don't know.
Right. I thought they were near Milan.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been, but I don't know for sure. When I look at that, we'll do that. They were. His mom was a bright redhead, carrot top, and my aunts, all of his sisters, were also bright redhead. He was the only boy, and the last of like 12. All girls, most of whom did not survive. They either died in infancy, and quite a number of them, 3 or 4, died during the 1918 flu epidemic. And they were all redheads, bright red hair, the kind that never gets dark and just turns white eventually. Zerok, who was his mother's brother, his nickname was El Rus, which is the rooster, because he had this bright red hair. They all did. Now, Pop, of course, had black hair. He had their complexion because he could blister out in the sun. He looked like Swami on the beach because he couldn't take the sun. He had a very fair skin. His dad worked in construction. Just picture Pop, that's how he was built. That same short, stocky, bow-legged, but he had very, very bright blue eyes, real bright. And he had a big white handlebar mustache and a shock of white hair, a lot of hair, much more than, Pop ever had. But he had that real thick white hair that you never get bald, that one, but very piercing blue eyes. I only knew him until 45 when he passed away, but I remember seeing him, and he lived with us, so I do have a memory of him. Pop's mom was named Katherine. That's who I'm named after. She was literate. She was seems to me from the stories I heard, seemed to be really bright. She was somebody that the others on the street or in the neighborhood or at the church would ask to read their letters because they couldn't read, and she would write letters for them so she could send them back. So she must have had some education and some kind of, abilities. His father, I don't know. It was hard to separate the tales because, Nana couldn't stand him. And for good reason. He was an alcoholic. As she said, he drank anything that poured. So it was not a good situation. He drank a lot, and my father was left at the age of 13 when his mom died, same age that Nana's father died. He was left practically to raise himself. The sisters that had been left were grown and out of the house. He had been his mom's pet in a lot of ways, He always said she made all of his clothes, made his sweaters, she even made his shirts. She sewed all of that stuff. And she used to earn money by sewing in the house also. Um, he said he remembers her putting sequins on these very fancy dresses, you know. He idolized her in turn, the way Nana idolized her dad. He had the same feeling with his mom, and he really, really missed her. She died on Christmas Eve, the year he was 13. So, not a good. You know, he was kind of left on his own, but he was very serious. Made sure he stayed in school, and he did graduate from South Philly High in January 1929. No, 1930. Not a good time to graduate. And he stayed in school. He would have liked to have gone further, but it was just financially almost impossible. You know, it was the Depression. Had already, you know, the crash had been that October. He graduated the January following. That was not a good time. People were always scrambling for jobs. He entertained all of his grandchildren with the tales of his jobs, or non-jobs. I mean, you know, he sold ladies' shoes. He said, they lie. All of them lie. I wear a 5. And he'd think, shh. He said, and then he'd walk out with an 8. You know, he did all kinds of jobs, you know, whatever he could get a hold of. He felt very fortunate when he latched on to the Navy Yard sometime in the 30s, mid-30s, I think. I think he started there around 35, which was still, it's a good 5 years of knocking around.
I think he was, if I remember the story, it was the Buick Agency.
A what?
The Buick Agency when he graduated.
Yep.
And he lost that job because he didn't have a female voice. They wanted a female voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he went to Atlantic City and did sketching.
Did a lot of sketching. He did it in the summers, and he would draw because he said you had to make them prettier than they were. He said, and you got tips. So, you know, he knocked around a lot, but he kept his nose down. Did not get into trouble. It's one thing about them. These people had hard lives, but they always kept to the straight and narrow, which is, you know, commendable. But I think part of that has to do with this very tight community. You know, it wasn't only your parents looking after you, because you had 47 aunts and uncles living in the neighborhood too. You couldn't get away with anything. Sure, they did at some point, but I think it kept people close. I do. But once he got into the Navy Yard, he never left. He never left the government. You know, could not understand why his children wouldn't do it. He said, you know, the government's always going to be there. He said, everybody else can fail, which he knew, you know, from experience. But it was his savior. It really was. So he worked on the aircraft side. Started as an apprentice, machinist. Then decided, then the war broke out. As I've told you, he decided he was going to enlist because it was the patriotic thing to do. And that didn't work because he was working on aircraft and they needed them for the war effort. And so they refused him for that. And then he spent a lot of time during the war training women to do jobs that a lot of the men were doing. So that he enjoyed it. He was a trainer and did that. And then he eventually got out of the shop. He became a I don't know what he called it. It's like an estimator. They needed to do a job. They needed some kind of machinery, and it was up to him to figure out what they needed and what kind of machinery, if they owned it already, how much it was going to cost, that type of thing. I used to say, what are you? He said, I am a word weasel. And what he meant by that was, he said, they want a contract, and they have certain specs, so he would write the specs up. So he said, And then because it's government, it goes out to bid. So because it has to be an open bidding process. He said, except there was always a manufacturer or two who were favored. So what you had to do was write the specs so that only they would qualify. So he said, I was a word weasel. So, that's typical Pop-Up. But he was very proud of the fact that he had gotten beyond the shop, that he went to work with a suit and a tie every day. And he, that was an achievement for him. Yeah, it really was. I mean, those were days, most of the people they knew were tradespeople of one sort or another, or, they were plumbers, electricians, tile setters, that kind of thing, So he felt that he had done better, and he was proud of that. So, and he did. He did. I mean, for somebody who had to practically raise himself, no mom, his sister's gone, his father drunk, he did raise himself. He did a pretty good job.
He was, I think you said 12. He was the last of 13, right? He was the last of 13?
Yes, yes, he was.
And it was 12 girls?
Yes.
And how many of the girls survived? Just the two, or?
As far as I know, there were only 3 or 4 that survived. Several of these died in infancy. And then those that had gotten older, as I said, 3 or 4 died during the 1918 flu epidemic. So, these are in tough times. He always told stories. He could remember, he couldn't have been more than about 6 or 7 when that was going on, but he remembers in the neighborhood on the street, people with white bows on their door. They were crepes. A white one meant a child had died, and a black one that an adult had died. And he said that almost every door on his street had a crepe on the door. And people were dying so fast. He said, I remember wagons coming through, and they would collect coffins. So that had to be really terrifying. But, you had to be strong to survive those days. There was no penicillin, not even sulfa drugs, nothing. You fought it on your own, and that was how you lived.
He was healthy. He never missed a day at work, right? Did he ever miss a day at work?
Rarely. He got all kinds of attendance awards all the time. He always went. No, he was very, very conscientious. You had to be. Anybody that didn't do that, they were just bums. That's, they don't want to make anything of themselves. He used to say, they both did, my parents said, every generation has to work itself to be better than the one before, or you're lazy. You haven't taken advantage of opportunities. That was how they thought. And the people who didn't do better, they would just say they were just lazy. There's a certain truth to that.
You may remember more later, but we'll go up to Nana Pop meeting. What do you know about your parents meeting and getting married?
My parents?
Yeah, meeting and then having kids.
Oh, all I remember is that they met at a dance. They went dancing, and that's what they did. That's how they met. They didn't know each other all that long, I believe. Not that long, maybe a year. And they were not all that certain. It was still depression. Things were still very bad. And I know that they didn't see each other for a month or something to see whether it was really real. Typical of Pop-Up, takes his time making up his mind. And they finally got married on February 18th, 1939. But that's about it. And they moved to Pop's house, where he lived with his father. Nana moved there, much to her distress. But it was a little tiny house on a real little tiny street. Very tiny, on Latona Street, near 12th and Federal, between Federal and Ellsworth. Yeah, that 1214 Latona. At the end of the street, across the street, there was the Jackson Elementary School, where I went. On the street, across the street on the corner, was a lamp factory. Yeah. I almost got killed by a truck delivering stuff for the lamp factory. I was on my front step there, and I came off the front step, and this truck was very big. It was trying to back, and it backed up, and it went up over the curb. And I dropped down behind the wheel. I can still remember the smell of the tire, the rubber. That's how close I was. But he missed me. And I never told my mom. I couldn't have been more than 6. But he missed me by inches, literally inches. He could not have seen me, because there was the step, the wall, and I had fallen in that corner. And when he backed up, he didn't see me at all. But I was close enough to feel the heat of the tire and smell the rubber.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Let me see where we are. Make sure we don't go past the tape. We have about 7 minutes on this tape. Say something. Oh, I can hear you. I'm gonna put this on up. Get this out of your hand so you don't touch anything here. Yeah, there we go. How's that?
Okay. You can clip it.
Yeah, I can clip it on. I should put it in your pocket. You put it there?
Okay. Oop.
Yeah, put it in your pocket or something.
I'll put it in my pocket.
All right. Yeah.
You're not photographing that low. I don't want to look hippie.
Yeah, no. Okay, so tell me about, actually, with 5 minutes left on tape. We'll finish up with your parents, and then we'll go to the next, get a drink, and we'll talk about your childhood on the next tape.
Okay.
So before we move on to that, anything else about Pop's side of the family that you haven't covered?
They were not the go-getters that the Pugliese were. My mom did not care for them at all. And at the time my grandfather died, they had a huge falling out with his family, and I saw very little of them for many years, except for Zadok, my father's uncle, and except for people like May and Lou. You may have remembered Lou was the son of one of his sisters, the Leahs. Lou was about Pop's age. They were, because his sisters were so much older. And his brother, so I knew those, but the rest of the family really not part of our lives. They really cut off relationships there. It was just over the same issues the families have, and money. Pop lived with his father in that house for for all the years since he was, small. And once he got older, he began to fix the house up. He put in a kitchen, and he put in, he fixed it up, everything. And when his father died, this other sisters decided he shouldn't get the house, he should divide it. And he said no, he left it to me. And they had a huge fight, and that was it. It was a huge, and They did get together somewhat later, but I was an adult, 20s. To me, they were out of my life already. I was married. I knew very little of them. I did meet some, later. But, that's what families do. It comes down to money, blood doesn't count. you know. So I don't know a lot about his family. I really don't. I knew the Delias, which was one of his sisters. Another sister was a Murphy. Her name was Josephine, also Murphy. But to tell you the truth, I really don't know that much about them. You have to ask Uncle Bob sometime, maybe he'll remember, but I don't.
So Josephine Murphy, what's the first name of the sister named Delia?
Delia? I don't know. I knew her children. I knew Lou and May and his other brother, Anthony, but I don't know her. I would not have recognized her. We were always with May and Lou or Anthony and his wife Isabel. But these guys were my parents' generation. Maybe a few years younger. And those people I knew. In fact, May and Lou's daughter was in my wedding party, Joan. But I can't tell you that much about them. I really don't know.
Okay, let's take a break. Dun, dun, dun.